Good afternoon from Gettysburg today. It is March the 22nd, 2022. I'm out on the battlefield. Been doing some tours today. Had a live stream tour at 3 p.m. today, and there were some internet connectivity issues with cell data. So the live stream dropped out a couple of times, restored itself, but I thought just in case that didn't upload and didn't record too well, I'll shoot a static video. I'll upload that to YouTube later on, and we'll get some content up and just make sure I've got a good backup video. So for those of you that know the battlefield, you might be able to guess where I am based upon the building that's in the background. That's the Corduroy Farm over there on Emmitsburg Road. So I must be up here just below Cemetery Ridge. I'm on the military crest below Cemetery Ridge. There's a little bit of noise in the background at the moment. Some of the monuments here are getting a cleaning, which means sandblasting, so there's some mechanical noise in the background, but unfortunately I can't avoid that. But I do want to be where I'm standing today because it's important on the content that I'm talking about, that I am literally standing on the ground where the men fought that I'm talking about today. So the subject today of the live stream, and what I really want to talk about now, is the 2nd Vermont Brigade. So the name would indicate, it is a brigade of Vermont troops. It's not the first, not the senior, it's the second. So these are the troops that have probably been recruited later in the war, and in fact they were. These are troops that were recruited in the summer of 1862, second year of the war, and brought into federal service in October of 1862. The Union Army had suffered a few setbacks. The Peninsula Campaign had been a bust. Second Battle of Bull Run, not so good. Lincoln issued a call for additional troops. He needed to make up the casualties. He needed to make sure he had enough men in the Army of the Potomac to continue the war. One of the ways they did that was, of course, recruit new units that were 3-year units recruited for 3 years or the duration of the war, so they knew they were going to be in it for the long term. But also, when they appealed to the governors of the states, they asked if the governors of the individual states, so such as Vermont, had any militia units that would sign on for 9 months. So not for the duration of the war, not for a year, not for 3 years, but for 9 months service. So a short period of enlistment. That would allow those inexperienced troops, these new troops raised, these 9 months men, to be deployed on line of communications duties, such as guarding railroad lines, guarding the supply routes for wagon trains, guarding railroad depots and supply depots, and to be placed in the defences of Washington DC. So we had that video we did a week ago from Fort Foote in the defences of Washington DC. So it would have been in one of those Washington DC forts protecting Washington DC. Moving these troops in, these 9-month men, that would give the War Department, that would give Lincoln's administration the opportunity to put these less experienced men, these short timers, into those positions, and the more experienced long-term troops that were being tied up guarding railroad bridges and guarding supply depots could be redeployed into the field for field service. So Vermont contributed an additional brigade of troops, 5 regiments of 9-month volunteers that were sworn into federal service in October of 1862. This was the 13th Vermont, 14th, 15th, no, 12th Vermont, 13th, 14th, 15th and 16th. 5 regiments of 9 months infantry that were grouped into a brigade and kept together as a brigade. Initially they moved down to Washington DC and spent much of their time in the defences of Washington DC, just on garrison duty, reacting to the occasional cavalry raid, Confederate cavalry raid, but otherwise not really engaged in combat by any means. So these are 9-month volunteers, not battle-hardened troops, but good patriots and willing to serve. Along comes the summer of '63, and the summer of '63, following the Army of Northern Virginia, the Confederate success at Chancellorsville, that battle success there, and the chaos really that the Army of the Potomac is in with reorganization. General Lee decides that he's going to launch another invasion of the North and moves the Army of Northern Virginia up the Shenandoah Valley again and crosses into Maryland, and then crosses from Maryland into Pennsylvania and begins what will be known as the Gettysburg Campaign. So the Army of the Potomac is scrambling its way back up from Virginia, back up through Maryland, trying to find General Lee's army and bring them to an engagement. At the same time, the command of the Army of the Potomac is passing from Joe Hooker to George Meade. It's obvious that the Army of the Potomac is going to need every man that can carry a musket. So not just the men that are in the field at the moment, but any man that can be found anywhere, any regiment that can be found anywhere, needs to join the Army of the Potomac in the field so that when they find Lee, they will outnumber him and they will be able to defeat him. So as many men as can be brought to bear will be brought to bear. And this is why the Army of the Potomac at Gettysburg includes Maryland Home Guard regiments that were essentially supposed to just be guarding Maryland, but have been brought into the field and brought into combat. And then also units are being brought out of the defences of Washington DC and rushed up here to add additional support to the Army of the Potomac. And one of those units is the 2nd Vermont Brigade, those 5 regiments of 90-day men. Now we're talking about June of 1863. We're talking about these men are coming to the end of their enlistment. They're about ready to go home, but they're being dragged up north from Washington DC, dragged into Pennsylvania, and they're going to be assigned to the 1st Corps under the command of John Reynolds. And that 1st Corps is going to be the Spearpoint Corps that comes charging up here on July the 1st, the 1st Union infantry on the field that day, to come up and support the Union cavalry on that first day of battle is 1st Corps. Now the 2nd Vermont Brigade is not in that vanguard. We're talking about the vanguard, we're talking about the Iron Brigade and guys like that. But the 2nd Vermont Brigade are these 90-day men coming to the end of their enlistment. They're not battle-hardened men. So even though they're making up the numbers, even though they're carrying a musket, whether they're going to be employed in battle itself is not certain on July the 1st. The brigade is divided. 2 regiments are taken away. The 12th and the 15th Vermont are taken away from the brigade and assigned at Westminster, Maryland, back there in the rear. Assigned to Westminster, Maryland to become part of the baggage guard, guarding the supply trains and the logistical supply route of the Army of the Potomac. So some of the regiments are removed from the brigade. The brigade then moves forward up to Gettysburg, not in time to participate in fighting on July the 1st, but the 3 remaining regiments, the 13th, 14th and 16th, will arrive here at Gettysburg in time to come into position on July the 2nd. So on July the 2nd, I'm roughly in the position now of where the Vermont Brigade was. I'm slightly forward of the Union line at the moment. I'm slightly below the crest of Cemetery Ridge. I'm kind of even below probably the military crest of Cemetery Ridge. I'm just forward because I wanted to come away from the traffic. And so behind me, about 50 yards back there up on the crest of the hill, is the position in which the 2nd Vermont Brigade occupied on July 2nd. So July 2nd is a quiet day for them, a relatively quiet day for them. July 2nd is the day on which Dan Sickles, out there on the Union left, decides that he's going to move his entire corps forward, and we end up with the bitter fighting at Devil's Den, in the peach orchard and the wheat field. The Union is looking for individual units to plug those gaps, and so these units are being plugged in here. The Vermont Brigade is brought forward to plug a gap. 5th Corps is being brought forward. We get the troops being sent up onto Little Round Top and the action up there on July the 2nd. But for the 2nd Vermont Brigade, these 3 regiments of 90-day men, there's not much action going on. Behind me there you see the Corduroy Farm on Emmetsburg Road. So if you know the battlefield, coming out on Emmetsburg Road, farmhouse, nice big red farmhouse, red barns to the side of it. You'll recognise that as you're driving around the battlefield. And so the Vermonters are across from there. Now on July the 2nd, there are some Confederate skirmishes down there in this swathe of open ground behind us between Seminary Ridge, where the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia is, and Cemetery Ridge over here, like a mile and a bit away. There's some contesting between skirmishers. You'll send out a skirmish line and a picket line. Your pickets will exchange fire with their pickets. They'll exchange words with each other. There'll be some skirmishing throughout the day, and some of the skirmishing that takes place here involves the Vermont men who get into a skirmish down there at the farm with some Alabamians, and they drive them out and take about 80 prisoners. So they think to themselves, we've acquitted ourselves well. You know, we're inexperienced troops, we're 90-day volunteers, we're coming to the end of our enlistment, we've not really seen action, but we got in a tussle with those guys from Alabama and we took some of them prisoner. So they're feeling pretty pleased with themselves, and if that had been all that they had done during the Battle of Gettysburg, that would probably have been enough for them to have gained a significant measure of honour. But we come to July the 3rd, because the battle continues for another day. And if we know the position on July the 3rd, we know that that's the day that General Lee is going to decide he's going to send 15,000 troops coming this way in a frontal assault, aiming for this copse of trees over here, where he intends to break the centre of the Union line with what we know today as Pickett's Charge. It's not really Pickett's Charge, it's really the Pickett, Pettigrew, Trimble Charge. So it involves General Pickett's division, but it also involves brigades from Pettigrew's division and Trimble's division, making up that total of men. So as they move across this open ground, they have their preparatory bombardment, the infantry move out in that attack, those men deploy into a line half a mile wide. And so just imagine that you've got thousands of men coming towards you, and they're half a mile in front of you. They're just stretching half a mile from side to side. It's got to be an impressive sight, particularly if you're inexperienced troops. So as those troops advance, they're not heading in a straight line. If they'd have headed in a straight line, we'd have probably had Wilcox's brigade. I'm trying to think, yeah, we'd had some of those brigades coming straight in a line that have just come bonk straight into where this position is for the Vermont troops. And the Vermont troops, looking as the Confederates crossed the Emmitsburg Pike and came in around the farm there, are probably thinking, oh my gosh, they're heading straight for us. But they're not heading straight for you. As they're coming towards you, they're moving forward, they're executing a turn, moving slightly, realigning, coming forward, executing a turn, and they're always moving towards the left, towards their left, so towards the Union right, towards that copse of trees, towards that central position where Lee intends all of his units to converge in this attack, that Schwerpunkt, that like main point of concentration for the troops to break the Union line there. So the Vermonters see the Confederate troops moving slightly away from them and slightly away from them, and then the ground in front of them is empty. It's at that point that Brigadier Stannard, in command of the Vermont troops, sees an opportunity. Now, he has inexperienced troops, but he himself is an experienced commander. He's been in the war since 1861. That's how he's risen to command a brigade of troops. So he's not fresh to this dance. He understands what's going on. He understands that the Confederate troops are concentrating their attack to his right. So there are a couple of things he can do. He can either move his units through his interior lines and reinforce that position against the attack. He decides not to do that. Even though his men are inexperienced, he decides to take order two of those regiments forward, the 14th and the 16th. They move forward of the Union line. Now I'm about 100 yards forward of the Union line here. So they move about 50 yards forward of the Union line, and then they make a turn. So they're coming out facing towards here. The Confederates are to this side of us. They then make a turn. He orders the regiments to wheel on the first company, and they wheel out into line. You have two regiments now who have the entire of Pickett's division in enfilade. That entire Pickett's charge is now in enfilade. You have two Union regiments, several hundred men, level their muskets and fire into the flank of the Confederates as they advance, which of course is going to cause major disruption on the Confederate attack. They're not only being attacked from the front with musketry and artillery, they're now being fired upon from the side as well in this enfilading attack. Now remember, these are not experienced troops, these are not battle-hardened troops, but they've been ordered forward of their line, and they've been ordered into a slightly complicated maneuver to wheel into line and execute a flank attack that you would expect to be carried out by experienced battle-hardened troops, but it is carried out perfectly by these 90-day men. This is the period during the battle in which Major General Hancock, commander of 2nd Corps, is riding the line back here, trying to find individual units to plug the gaps in the line. He asks, who are those men? And he's told, well, that's the Vermont Brigade. And he had been about to order them to attack himself, but he sees that they've executed an attack themselves, so he's pleased with that. Although that does not last long, because if we go 200 yards to this side, there's a memorial there in which Hancock is actually wounded and knocked from his horse. There's a memorial to the Hancock wounding across there. It also attracts the attention of Major General Abner Doubleday. He, not of baseball fame, perhaps more importantly of Fort Sumter fame, but Abner Doubleday was a division commander within US 1st Corps. He'd been present on the first day of battle, and when John Reynolds had been killed on the first day of battle, Abner Doubleday had temporarily taken command of 1st Corps. 1st Corps is now under the command of Major General John Newton. Doubleday has reverted to divisional command, but Doubleday sees the attack go in. He sees those 2 Vermont units go forward, and he cries, glory to God, boys, look at the Vermonters go at it. So they are seen. It's not just that they execute this action and nobody saw them do it, but people see how well they did it, how bravely they acted, and what a devastating effect that flank attack had on the Confederate charge, the Confederate attack, and how it helped break up the Confederate attack. So why is that important? Well, when we look at the battle in its whole, we often think of just a general grand scale view of the battle, which is it lasted for 3 days. It was 90,000 men versus 75,000 men. There was some fighting on the first day with the cavalry. There was Pickett's charge. There was Little Round Top. There was something called Culp's Hill, and then Lee kind of retreated. So the overall battle, we talk about corps and division and tens of thousands of men. Sometimes it's helpful when you want to understand the battlefield and you're walking around on the battlefield and get out of the car, get out and look at some of the monuments to see, well, who is this monument to? This is to the 14th Vermont or the 13th Vermont. Who were they? What did they do on that day? Ask yourselves those questions, because where I'm standing now, excuse me, I'm literally standing in the position where the 13th Vermont stood on July 2nd. If I move a little further down, I'll be standing in the position where the 14th and 16th Vermont literally turned here, where I'm standing, facing the Confederate line, firing into its flank. So when we talk about viewing a battlefield and we talk about the importance of being on the ground and being in the footsteps of the men that fought that battle, if I put myself in the position of the 14th Vermont standing here, looking across there, I can see the roll of the ground as Pickett's men would have come up that last roll towards the copse of trees. I can see there's a slight swale there where the water line runs down the ridge. That ground would have been a little bit boggy. Remember, on July the 1st there'd been a rain squall, so the ground in that swale would have been a little bit boggy. It would have been quite difficult for the Confederates to have turned and come across there. Okay, these were men that maybe didn't have shoes, but that's a good way to lose a shoe, is in boggy ground here. So I'm also on a slight rise here. I'm looking down on that ground, so my fire is very concentrated. So when we talk about coming out and walking the ground, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about standing physically in the footsteps, in the exact space that battle was fought. And then from that space, from the view that we have from that space, from looking at the ground, we get a better understanding of how the battle was fought here and the conditions that the men fought in. So we're talking about you really need to come out here in a July or an August day to experience the humidity of a mid-Atlantic summer, in which you'll get a hot day with blinding sun, and then you'll get thunderstorms in the evening, which will make the ground wet. So you have hot, wet, muggy, sweaty, humid days here during the summer. So you can come out here and wear a wool sack coat and stand here. You're really going to appreciate in July what those men felt like physically if you stand in that position. So there's lots of ways that you can experience and understand, rather than not experience yourself, to accurately experience the Battle of Gettysburg, you'd have to stand here and have somebody firing a cannon at you, which doesn't really kind of meet health and safety regulations. So, but to think about what the men experienced themselves, it is very, very helpful to be out on a battlefield. It is very, very helpful to see the ground, to see how this is not flat ground. The Emmetsburg Pike is slightly higher. The tree line there, the field fills away, it comes down into a dip. It comes up this slight rise. There's a swell there for water course. Comes up to a rise here. It falls away to this side as well, to another water course on that edge line, so that you get a good appreciation of how, when the Confederate troops are moving across here, and they're coming across here half a mile wide, there's going to be times where, like, where did they go? Oh, there they are. They came out of a dip in the ground. They're in another dip. Now they came out again. Well, they can't get through that ditch, so they had to open up a slight gap, and there's now a little gap in the line where they had to then come around. You can actually see that it's not a straightforward charge. It's not even a straightforward walk from back there in Spangler's Woods all the way across this open ground to attack here. If you really want to do something, then you start over at the Virginia Memorial, park your car there, make sure you pack a couple of bottles of water on a hot day, and just hike across and follow the line of that attack, and you'll see that the ground is uneven, and you need a good pair of walking boots to actually get across there. It's not something you want to do in a pair of sneakers or a pair of Crocs. It's probably not something you want to do barefoot as well, because if you walk across there during the summer, you're going to find snakes and you're going to find ticks. That's Gettysburg wildlife for you. So actually coming out and standing on this ground, you get a good appreciation for all of that stuff, and I think that's why it's important that when we come out and we talk about the Battle of Gettysburg, it's good to break it down, to talk about, well, this is what Lane's North Carolinians did. So we did a talk where we're over where Lane's brigade was, and we talked about his North Carolinians and what their action was. Or we're talking today about the Vermont troops. Or we'd be out on Benner's Hill, we'll talk about Latimer's artillery battery. We talk about individual actions of smaller units, which helps us personalise the battle. It helps us reduce the battle space to a manageable level that we can talk about. We're not talking about 5 miles here, 3 miles here, 2 miles here. We're talking about smaller areas, so it's easier to envisage the battle space and to think about the space that we're in. We're talking about smaller units. We're able to talk about the individual men. We're able to talk about the individual equipment, the individual experience, and how those individual units and how those individual locations contribute to the overall story at the Battle of Gettysburg and any other battlefield that we're out there visiting as well. The same things apply to those battlefields when we visit other battlefields as well. So I just thought I would shoot this short 20-something minute video to talk about, like, hey, out at Gettysburg, talking about 2nd Vermont Brigade, fantastic flank attack on July the 3rd, just so that I got a fallback video I can upload to YouTube if the live stream did not record that well. So thanks for joining me on this one. We've got additional tours coming up in the future. You can check those out on the Facebook page. That's where we log the events. So you go to facebook.com/walkingtheground, all one word. Check under events and you'll see all the events that we have listed. Just click on going or interested. Lots of free live streams so that you can sit at home and watch a live stream. And there's a few participatory events as well, which will be some Zoom talks and some Zoom discussions and some Zoom chats. Bring your own bottle. Adult libations welcome. Generally PG language though, please. So there are some Zoom talks as well and so forth that are listed up there on the Facebook page that you can sign up for. You can also follow us on other social media. We're on Twitter at Walking Ground. Couldn't get Walking the Ground because Walking the Ground has one letter too many. So we're Walking Ground on Twitter. Over on, what are we else on? YouTube, Walking the Ground on YouTube. We're Walking the Ground on Coffee. We're Walking the Ground on Telegram. I forget how many social media outlets we have where we're copying this content to, but however you're following us, however you found us, thank you very much. Please share that with your friends. Please look at the old video links and the old tours that we've done. If there's something that you're looking forward to in the future, do let us know. If you're like, oh, I like that talk about the 2nd Vermont, but what about the 1st Minnesota? Didn't they do something similar on that day? Well, yes, they did, and we could talk about them on another day on another tour. So whatever your interest is here at Gettysburg, where I do these free live streams from. The reason they're free from Gettysburg is that Gettysburg has excellent professional licensed battlefield tour guides. So if you want an in-person tour of Gettysburg, go to the licensed battlefield tour guides. So if you go to the visitor center, you'll be able to pick up and hire a licensed battlefield tour guide. You can go to their website, you can phone in and book in advance and make a tour booking in advance. They're the blue shirt guides. They've passed examinations, they've walked this ground over and over again. They know this battlefield backwards, and they do a stunning job here as well. So there is a licensed battlefield guide here. And so when I come out to these battlefields, it's because I want to come out and film some content for classroom content, or I'm just having a day off, or I want to just come out and visit the battlefield and come to some of my frequent spots that I come to. And so that's what I recommend you do. You take a licensed battlefield tour and get one of those professionals to do that, which is why, of course, when I come out and do these are all free live streams, because there's professionals that do this for a living, and I am not going to charge money for something that somebody else does for a living. So I'm just kind of like me here, unofficially just talking to the camera and just having fun, really. So I'm glad that you're able to join me with these battlefield tours. Of course, I'm at other places as well where I am able to tour in person and lead tour groups in person. So if there are you want details of that, just shoot me an email, drop me a DM and ask me for details on those. We're up on lots of formats. We've got lots of other talks coming up in the future. Last week we were at Fort Foote in the defences of Washington DC. We're going to be out at Monocacy, down at the Thomas Farm, talking about action at the Thomas Farm. We've got some summer trips planned where we may be at the Battle of Poroduro Canyon. We may be at the Battle of the Washita. We may do some Indian War tour work this summer, still in development. And there's lots of other events listed on the Facebook page. As I say, just click on events and sign up for those. And so thank you for joining me today. Thank you for all the likes, all the follows, all the comments, all the questions. I do appreciate all the likes, and I do appreciate all the follows, and I do appreciate the comments as well, because quite often it gives me something to think about, particularly if it's a question that I have to go away and think about before I answer. I particularly love the comments from people that have done their Ancestry.com and they're finding the roots experience, and know that they had relatives that fought in these battles, ancestors that fought in these battles. That's always interesting when somebody says, oh, my great-great-grandfather was in 26 Virginia or something like that. It's always interesting to get those comments. I do like those, because again, that draws us to the actual events themselves and gives us a personal connection to those. So please keep those comments coming, and I will see you around on some of the other tours, and probably next week, when I think we're either down at the Battle of Severn on the western shore of Maryland, or we're at Monocacy, or somewhere, I don't know. Head on over to Facebook, facebook.com/walkingtheground, and sign up for all those lovely free live stream tours. Thanks.